Hey guys, welcome back. I'm your host, Flynn, and I'm here with my good friend, Nick Gower.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for coming on.
No problem.
Thanks for having us. We're actually doing this live from Mentally Friendly, which is your studio.
Yeah, this is usually our testing room.
Yeah.
And we've got it all rigged up.
It's awesome. It's super, super cool. And thank you all for jumping in the chat. So welcome to World Interaction Design Day if you're just joining us. We might bring up the schedule again for those that are. So here we're at 9:30 in Sydney. So chatting with Nick Gower, and stick around. We've got lots of content coming. We've got some designing with Pin right after this at 10:30. But we'll flick back and have a little bit of a chat about who you are and what you do. So you're one of the co-owners of Mentally Friendly.
Yeah.
You're also a designer and...
Yeah, I identify as a designer. I don't get
good.
to do a lot of design these days,
Yeah.
like in the sort of more like interaction traditional sense.
in the trenches.
Yeah, I'm not in the trenches. Well, I'm in the trenches. I'm just not pressing the buttons usually.
Right.
I spend a lot of time working on projects still. I think it's like, for me, where I get my energy from. You know, building the business and finding new challenges for the team and building the team is, you know, its own really rewarding design challenge.
Yeah.
But I get a lot of energy from, you know, being on projects, solving problems, you know, helping solutions evolve.
Yeah.
So I still spend a lot of time doing that.
Mm-hmm. But you started as a designer.
Yeah.
And I think every time I visit you, every time we kind of hang out, I feel like I almost need to say, cool, so what does Mentally Friendly do now?
Yeah.
Because it's changed so much.
Yeah.
Over the years, like it seems to be constantly evolving. I think we spoke about being fluid.
Yeah.
Earlier on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's well, it's interesting. We've just gone through like a branding kind of exercise, so been reflecting on this a tiny bit, and you know, I went to Billy Blue, did sort of traditional design, like branding design, and now we do sort of pure product service and a bit of policy design as well. So you know, everything's completely changed, but at the same time there's so many things that are really similar, which is actually what I want to talk about today. This like we've always had this real drive to actually make things, to make change, to help people get their like good intentions up and off the ground. And you know, our medium was like logos and things like that to begin with, which we were really passionate about, and then we became passionate about other sorts of things and product and service for like the last 10 years, I guess.
Yeah, cool. Okay, great. Well, so we've asked you to come and talk about the World Interaction Design Day topic, which is trust and responsibility, which has been really interesting, kind of chatting with everyone in the lead up to this about like where they've focused and their interpretation of either trust, responsibility, or both.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really interested in your take and kind of, you know, where you've gone kind of with this idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, immediately when I looked at those two words, trust and responsibility, they feel like it's one concept. But actually, like when I started going through the like the material that I had and the opinions that I, you know, could share and things like that, it really jumped out at me that perhaps they're two very different things. And probably today I want to talk like almost entirely about responsibility, and then perhaps we'll just have a little bit of a chat at the very end about trust. Like as I said at MF, our kind of brand purpose, I suppose, as you know, gone through the branding thing, so we got the words ready, is to sort of making good intentions real, to help people get those, you know, great intentions that they have for change up and off the ground, to build better products and services that ultimately sort of change people's lives for the better. And that's what I want to talk about. So I believe, or we believe, that the responsibility of design and designers is to make things that improve people's lives. And going back all the way to Billy Blue, I think, or the time I spent at Billy Blue, like that's obviously, and well before my time in design as well, I think that's been like a pretty central theme to the ambition of most or lots and lots of designers.
Right.
And you know, watching design studios evolve over the last few years, it's really clear that there is like a very real part that design studios can play in, you know, the incremental improvement of people's lives, or certainly, if they're not careful, making people's lives slightly worse. So that's kind of what I wanted to delve into. Like, I'm obviously pretty aware that it's a bit of like an amorphous topic. It gets spoken about a lot. It's a bit like, you know, they're big words, big concepts. And I just want to see if we can make it a bit more practical and just talk about how we, at a day-to-day level, actually try and, you know, shape the interactions that we design to deliver some type of, like, sometimes you call it well-being, you know, just good outcomes for people.
Okay, cool.
So the kinds of things I'd like you to chase me on, questions, and the sorts of things I'd like to get to is, what does that even mean? Like, what is like improving people's lives?
Yeah.
How do I measure that kind of thing? Is it possible to measure? It's obviously much easier to measure things like financial outcomes and those sorts of things. How do I get the kind of briefs that allow me to work on those kinds of projects so I can make a difference? Like sort of delve into that. Like, I'm working with a big corporate business in perhaps a big team, and maybe I don't get the opportunity to do that stuff, or do I? And then also, what design processes and tools are effective? Well, that's the sorts of things I was hoping to cover.
Yeah, that sounds perfect for us.
Cool.
And obviously, for everyone in the chat, you can also ask questions too. So if you ask a question as Nick's going through, then we can have a chat about that as well.
Cool. Trust and responsibility. So
I like that you highlighted responsibility.
Yeah, I feel like I probably should have gone to that slide earlier. Responsibility, that's the part we're going to talk about first.
That's us.
So what does improving people's lives sort of even mean? It's such a big concept. So we'll start with that. And the kind of big cliche, or the thing that you hear often when we're having these discussions is like, you need big dramatic system change, for it to be meaningful, or to be able to claim that you're sort of improving people's lives. And I think that is the first mistake we make as designers, is looking for that one big bang opportunity.
Like a silver bullet.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Most of the bad things that happen don't happen all at once.
Yeah.
And most of the good things that happen also sort of don't happen all at once. So unless you're sort of, the UN or a government or the CEO of a super important, well-supported company, chances are you're not going to be able to deliver unbelievably dramatic results. And even if you are, unless you're like perhaps Oprah, you can't do it immediately. Even those big businesses, governments struggle to deliver things quickly.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's helpful looking at it through that lens. But the good news is that the cumulative effect of all the interactions we have with the designed world around us do add up to really big changes for people. And maybe particularly the more boring ones, the kind of banking, health services, nutrition, exercise, sleep, going on the bus, buying things, reading articles, finding content, all those little things that we sort of are just pumping out onto the internet and into the real world through services every day, have this massive cumulative effect on people.
Right.
Sometimes we call it well-being, sometimes we call it improving people's lives, but the mental and physical well-being of people is massively affected by all these tiny little things, and you don't even realize I
was going to say, is that something that's hard to sort of put a pin on as well, and sort of, you can't really point to one thing. It's just everything over time.
That's exactly right. And I think that's the first thing to think about when trying to, wrap your head around how I can participate in this change, is to understand the weathering effects of time on people in positive and negative ways. Obviously, you don't get results from going to the gym once and all those sorts of things. So
right.
I guess, so think small changes over time, think supporting good behaviors, and think helping people make good decisions, and education and those sorts of things in all the different products and services that we build. And I think that's a really good lens for us to sort of start the conversation with, because we're probably not going to solve any big or even small problems all at once.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
So that's good advice for a lot of designers out there. Just not looking for that silver bullet. It's kind of more about nudging in the right direction than it is more about.
Yeah, well, that term nudge is a bit of a controversial one, but right. Yeah, it is about slowly.
What do you think about nudging?
Well, we'll get to that, I think, because that's where the trust part comes in. Okay. It's if we are nudging people, when we are nudging people, are we the right people to be doing that? There's right. I think that's the kind of tension in that trust and responsibility title for today. So who gets to make the difference is the next one. So the first question is, what is it? Maybe it's too big of a concept for me to help with. And the second one is the me part. Who does get to make that difference? And I guess I've sort of already started to hint at it, but all projects, all companies, all process, all designers, everyone gets to make a difference. In fact, you kind of can't escape it really. You know, if you're making you're changing the course of, you know, people's days and weeks and ultimately lives. So, you know, like I hear this sort of, I guess it's a bit of like a cliche, this sort of, I believe in design and I believe design can make a difference, but I don't feel like I'm in the right job or I have the ability to make a difference.
Okay, so that's still someone else's problem in that case, and that's like not the way that we should be thinking about it.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm not trying to tell people that they're not thinking in the right way, but I think it's just easy to think that way because of how small the interactions tend to be. It's easy just to feel like, oh, someone else is getting like the really great briefs, someone else is getting the really great projects.
Okay.
And obviously it's like that social media effect as well. Like you often see other studios or other businesses launch some really fantastic thing and, you know, you feel like, shit, I wish I'd done that, but you are doing that. You know, and we'll talk about that. Yeah.
So design can save the world.
Design can save the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's a Nick Gower quote. I just wanted that on camera.
Yeah. Well, actually, during our branding process, that came up in I can't remember what year that was. Like, it must be 10 years ago minimum.
Right.
We did an exhibition for the Powerhouse called Eyesore with Simon Pemberton.
I remember that.
And it was on the power of design or something, and we made a fake zebra crossing, but with the words design can save lives, which feels a really, as you said, like everything's changed at MF, but that's been our sentiment the whole way through.
Right, since then, yeah.
And that was a solid 10 years ago. But yeah, anyway, so I guess, you know, people talk about doing good and trying to find the time for great projects in between their BAU work. But I think really what we're looking at is how do you know, recognize that your design job is making people's lives better or worse as BAU. Like that's what you're doing. Every time you make a website or an app or a product or a service or a button or anything, you're sort of building that stuff out. So what I'm going to do over the next couple slides and stuff is just break down those sort of 4 categories very, very roughly. So how do we sort of set up our projects, our companies, our process and ourselves as designers to, I guess, set ourselves up to be angling the work we're doing to turn the tide towards good versus bad outcomes for people. And I think as well as aligning that good with companies, you know, I think I sort of hinted at it a second ago, but actually some of the biggest opportunities for really great change is in like the really big, boring kind of stock standard products and services we use every day. You know, there's some really exciting startups and things that you see pop up and really exciting kind of ideas as well. But really those buttons that you press every single day, that repetition, that's where the opportunity is. So like if you're working at, like I use the example of a bank a lot just because I think finance is so core to pretty much everything that we do.
Yeah, true.
But if you work in obviously government or if you work in, you know, any type of like core service like that, you know, medical and stuff like that, you have this huge opportunity to make change. And I think it's really easy actually to align great human outcomes with great business outcomes. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So here we go. So we'll start by setting up all projects to improve people's lives. And I think that this is probably the most practical part and the most practical thing that we can do. So I really believe that you make what you measure. So whatever you are measuring as a business, an organization, or as a designer, whatever you value, that's the thing that you'll make. Like you'll end up making it sort of subconsciously. You know, as we know, most organizations tend to favor monetary measures.
Right. Like the bottom line, what's my ROI?
Yeah. And, you know, like partially because it's, you know, the purpose, I guess, of a capitalistic business, but also I think just because it's easy, it's like their numbers already. It's easy to measure the money going in and out of like a certain system. So I don't want to like go too far into that right now, but we as designers are also setting a bunch of measures, and we're not as good as measuring them as the businesses typically, but we start to set ourselves these goals and we get a huge amount of freedom to set these goals actually.
Right.
You know, we start talking about this concepts that we have really invented, which is like seamlessness, like this concept of like building interaction seamlessness, being able to go between things really quickly, reduce friction, save time, and that sort of bleeds into this idea of convenience, sort of putting the right things in front of the right people. You know, if you're designing online, obviously that's probably your obsession, is, you know, making things really easy, like putting everything in the one place, aggregating things, you know, simplifying stuff. Then novelty, which is a bit of a weird word, but it really means like sort of curiosity and surprise, like driving people to be interested in things. You know, we love that as designers typically, is making things fun and bringing them to life to drive like deeper interactions.
So it's like an example of that.
What's an example of that?
Yeah.
Well, I think anything that isn't just like Helvetica, well, anything that isn't the page that you're looking at right now, I suppose,
right,
is sort of that. Like design ornamentation is about creating curiosity and interest, you know, changing colors and animations and, you know, like, I guess, you know, really interactive things where you have to find your way around.
Right.
So like, I guess a good example of that is like Snapchat is just mayhem from an interaction perspective.
Right.
Like there is no rhyme or reason to why any of that exists.
Right, it's just a chaos.
Yeah,
UI.
it's chaos.
Yeah.
But the point is, you know, they're creating this sort of like curiosity and interest, and you're looking for the new features and you're excited when you find them, and, you know, that kind of drives, you know, some type of value. And then obviously beauty. That's historically been a big focus of design, but it also plays like a real, you know, functional role in the quality of outcome, because it sort of speaks to clarity of information as well as kind of just this natural human leaning towards, you know, enjoying things which are beautiful, I guess. So this is sort of like the palette that we often choose to paint from in terms of the value that we offer, you know, the things that we make.
Yeah.
And while we're probably not, you know, measuring them at a numeric value, we are certainly at a crit level when we're, you know, working together as teams. We're talking about it a lot, and you know, when we're, you know, expressing things as design outcomes, these kind of concepts come up a lot in UX and UI and service design as well. So yeah, I guess this is an interesting starting point. So look, I just want to run like a bit of a thought experiment against this. So we're going to redesign something really quickly.
Okay, no problem. This is live.
This is live. So basically, the brief, I suppose, here is, and everyone will be reasonably familiar with this, changing. We're a bank. We've briefed in our team to build a new service. It's going to be an online bank. It's going to, you know, make it really easy for people to use money. And it's going to win us heaps of customers because of its amazing experience. So it's not like a financial driver. It's not like a marketing type thing. The experience is winning. So we get to do whatever we want. And we're going to paint from our kind of palette of seamlessness, convenience, novelty, and beauty, which is kind of what's happened over the last 10 years, right? So we've spent heaps of time, you know, making, you know, money frictionless, making it easy to, you know, at that interaction point of buying something, you know, switching between accounts, you know, making it really convenient to pay bills, you know, not as much novelty in money, obviously, but there kind of is in sort of some of the kind of startups and things like that. But certainly beauty is something that we tend to value as well there, you know, really clean, beautiful kind of like web stuff. So that sounds good. It also sounds easy, right? Because wallets are pretty lame. You know, like wallet's a pretty easy thing to beat in terms of like a starting point.
Right.
It's like
the bar is low.
The bar is low, isn't it? Because, you know, like you have to fill it up with money, which is a pain. It's easy to lose. If you lose it, unlike a phone, it's all gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to fill it up all the time as well. It could be stolen, all those sorts of things. So, you know, it should be it's not like a very fair fight.
Poor wallets.
Poor wallets. They're a goner, right? But the problem, I suppose, is that the wallet is actually this amazing metaphor. It's like an amazing metaphor for understanding money. And even though we're able to hit, and all banking apps, or most banking apps hit those four things really, really quickly, they're able to hit, they're able to reduce friction and make that happen really quickly. They actually make things worse. A wallet is a high friction, high comprehension thing. You know, it's like I open my wallet, it's $100 in there. Right. If I spend $10, I've got $90. I understand where it's going. When $100 goes, I think, shit, I've got to go to the ATM and get more money. And that process is really helps me understand what's going on. Whereas all that's gone with online banking. It's low friction, low comprehension.
Right.
So actually, the cumulative effect of all those little design decisions have made it really easy to make bad decisions quickly and not realize that you're doing that.
Right. And it's just money slowly coming out of my account from something that I subscribed to a while ago. And
that's right. Yeah. And there's no upside in this for banks. This isn't like one of those situations where, you know, but on the other side, you know, like the corporate machines desperately trying to confuse you, because this is bad for everybody. Customers with poor resilience who are spending money they don't have and perhaps racking up bills they don't realize and never have the opportunity to pay them back are like, that's not what banks want.
Yeah.
It wasn't what the brief was, because the brief was to build an experience that people love.
Right.
So it's kind of a result of this like limited palette that we've sort of given ourselves. And that seamlessness, convenience, novelty, and beauty. And I'm not saying that that's all any designer uses, but they're just the sort of go-tos, and they're the ones we tend to speak about the most. We call these sort of enablers, and they're a part of like a slightly larger group that includes like affordability, discoverability, technology type, stuff like that, which aren't inherently good or bad. They're just things, right? They're tools.
Things. Oh.
And there are, they could be bad, and like they could be good. So what else exists? Like, how can we broaden our palette to like more types of interactions and more type of value to measure? This is like a crazy big pyramid of different things. And it's sort of just like, this is ours, and I'm sure there's like a million other ways of doing this. But this is how we try and look at the beginning of projects, how we're going to color our interactions, I suppose, the products and services that we build, the things that we sort of launch, I guess. This is the kind of value that we're going to try and create.
Pyramid of things.
So many things, right? It's sort of like loosely lowest value to highest value, or perhaps highest complexity at the top.
Right.
But I guess that's not really the point. The point just is that there's heaps and heaps of things that create like human value that are intrinsically good. All autonomy is good. All enjoyment is good. Validation is this important human kind of thing that we need, and it makes us stronger, more resilient, and all those sorts of things. And the way we like to look at this is through the lens of value propositions, and I'm sure like most people will be pretty familiar with that concept, but I'm just going to introduce it to make the next few kind of case studies I'll take you through in a second make sense. So the value proposition is like the value we're promising to customers or to the world, not just the idea. So the value proposition for banking apps that currently exist, or the old style of banking app that kind of confuses you but allows you to pay heaps, would be like the easiest way to pay. Right. You know, it's not inherently good or bad. It's just going to make it really, really easy.
Right. So it's just functional.
Yeah, it's just really functional. So yeah, what we tend to try and do is sort of take that bottom row as like, given it has to be all those things, has to be seamless and convenient and, you know, beautiful and those sorts of things, but not at the detriment of any of these other kind of measures. And then depending on the project, we'll try and set up or try and even vaguely understand if there is like a way of measuring this with numbers. Otherwise, these are just things, goals we're going to set ourselves to try and like observe through testing and those sorts of things. So if you just run that experiment again and say, okay, if we get that brief to redesign the wallet, and we say we want our new app, our digital thing to help drive resilience, build privacy, clarity, capability, and autonomy, then all of a sudden you've got this like way more powerful kind of value proposition, which might be like, get the most out of money, understand it better. And, you know, autonomy is really important, obviously, to people, so that they can spend the money the way they want to. So we're not going to stop people from spending money on stupid things or what we perceive to be stupid things. It's their money. We're just going to help build more control through capability, and you can kind of see how they sort of ladder up. You know, when you have the privacy and resilience, you know, you can start understanding things better and blah, blah, blah. So these aren't unlike conversations you might be having, but I guess the point is that you make what you measure. So if you try and set out even arbitrarily at the beginning to measure these things, then you start building things that are more powerful. And as like I guess the point of this chat is, you start to set your project up to deliver human value, as well as business value, and you can really start to merge these things. So you can say, for instance, in banking, like a really resilient customer is going to, borrow more over their lifetime, but also be able to pay it back. And use more of our services because they're having a great time, and not end up sort of having bad things happen and remediation and all those sorts of things.
Right.
So
we got a question from the audience.
Yep. Hit me.
We could derail for a second. From Logan, how do you encourage companies to work towards improving people's lives rather than just focusing on making a profit?
Yeah. Well, I think
it's a good question.
Yeah. I think we're already kind of doing that. The point is, what you want to do is help them find other things to measure and to associate that with profit, I guess,
Right.
So that example I just gave is a really good one. And I think it's really important, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but to balance those things, you need to balance that empathy and that sort of entrepreneurial sort of spirit. So resilience is this sort of like, hippie term, creating more resilient people and communities. But actually, in that example of being a bank, having a really resilient customer is actually a massive profit driver.
Right.
And we are able to find an example of that in almost any project. I mean, I guess there's probably some categories of project which are inherently bad, which I'm not gonna guess at now. Sure. But for the most part, in I would say almost all design jobs where they're investing in design, there's an opportunity to find one of these or some version of this, and then marry that back to kind of longevity of customers, like better understanding. There's a great paper that just came out about transparency, published by one of the banks, which spoke about when you're really transparent with customers about the good and bad points of financial products, like a super boring topic, right? But and you talk about the bad points as well as the good points, you actually sell more and people stay for longer because they buy the right thing.
Do you find that you often have to research let's say a client comes to you in an area that you haven't done, you don't have case studies that you can share with them or anything? Do you talk about it kind of esoterically or use other examples from other industries, or do you find that you have to really research into their specific kind of field to give them hey, this is exactly how it's going to work for you?
Yeah, I think it's always two things. It's always trying to find evidence, which is hard, particularly in innovation where you're sort of suggesting something quite new.
Yeah.
But yeah, anytime you can find evidence, that's really important. If you look at behavioral economics, and behavioral economics teams, they'll often have control group studies into the effects of different types of, support mechanisms for people and stuff like that, which you can use or sort of try and use. So there's half which is collecting data, and the other half is just building the conversation, making an argument for it, telling stories, and then building it through testing. So right now we're sitting in our testing lab, which is, it's got an observation room on the other side of that, double-sided two-way mirror, one-way mirror.
One-way mirror? I always get it.
Two-way mirror, one-way glass.
Isn't every mirror?
They're
That's
one-way.
Like a no-way mirror. Yeah.
So in here, we would set up, tests every single week, and get the clients to come through and watch those things play out. Watch how confused they are when you're, throwing the 10 different product offerings at them.
Right.
Watch how much brand kind of affinity is generated through the building of privacy. Show them how important privacy is to people, for instance, how that is a fundamental human right. So I think it's those kind of two, or maybe it's three things. It's building up data from external sources, just building the conversation and being intentional about the type of human value that you're trying to create and speaking intelligently about that, and then actually forcing those clients to actually go and watch it happen and see it for their own eyes, because I think believing is a big part of it. Seeing is believing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I like it. Great question.
Thanks. So I'll take you through a couple of like examples of features. Like I'll start like really simple with some features and then get a little bit more complex. So this is a feature or representation, I suppose, of a feature that's in the Triple J app. The team there have done an amazing job. I really love Triple J. I think they've done such a good job in, and this is the other thing, helping people see the connections that aren't obvious to human value. So,
and when you say the Triple J app, just for people that might not know what Triple J is, they're around somewhere else. It's like a radio station. They do a lot of podcasts, a lot of own created content.
Yeah, so it's a youth radio station, and it is basic. It's a government-owned youth or government-funded youth radio station that does amazing content, and it's very inclusive as a kind of as a brand, I suppose. It champions Australian music. It's like 50% Australian content, I think. And, it's made for the last 20 years, most of the really famous Australian artists that little bit more famous. And in a lot of cases, it actually discovered them. But I think the thing that people don't realize about Triple J, and one of the things that I think this sort of framework can help you sort of see, is how much value it offers to the community. I think for me, Triple J is probably doing more for mental health in young people than most of the government-funded services specifically designed for that.
Right.
At that exact time when young people are searching for meaning and trying to find like that thing that is them and connect with sort of the world and letting go of sort of being a kid, Triple J is there for 100% of Australians with really inclusive music, and it's this like kind of universal language, and they make this huge point of calling out people in little towns and making sure that they feel included. And that's like amazing, right? So they obviously kind of identified that there is a bit of a gap there though. To the reason people listen to the radio, the reason young people do in particular, I guess, is to be on air with other people, to get that sense that there's other people listening. Otherwise you just like go to one of the other streaming services, right?
Right.
And just choose the exact song you wanted to listen to on demand. So they obviously identified that there's this big gap between listening and hearing people calling in and actually calling in yourself, because you have to be really confident with your views. You have to be really confident with your spoken English, and if you're texting, your written English, and that's probably not true for a huge percentage of that particular audience.
Right.
And specifically the type of audience that perhaps does need that kind of, or that part of the service that they are sort of offering. So this really simple little interaction, I mean, everyone's sort of seen it on like Facebook Live and those sorts of things, but the ability to just tap emojis as songs are playing so that you can sort of express your feelings towards that song, sort of just seems like frivolous fun, right? It seems like we're just going for novelty, which it kind of is, but what they've been able to do there is just build this unbelievable inclusion, because anyone can press that button, everyone can see it.
Yeah.
It really highlights who's watching.
And the interactiveness of it as well. Yeah.
It's so immediate as well. And, that is just such a small thing. And to get that through, they would have had to make the argument that this is going to be better for our audience for some reason, and I imagine that's the argument that was made. So yeah, that's like an example of just like at a feature level, right?
Before we move on, we just have a question. And if you're just joining us, here with Nick Gower from Mentally Friendly, probably about halfway through. We've actually only got like 20 minutes left. Goes pretty quick, doesn't it? But yeah, so if you did miss it, just a question. How did you come up with the list of measured values that we had before?
Sure. So as I said, it's sort of our list. I'm sure it's not the only list. We put together a team of people here. We sort of felt ourselves needing a more formal format for that. We used like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and we did a bunch of card sorting and tried to look at the things that we felt we were able to deliver on. So it's our list. Our format is by no means like scientific, but it's really helped us to develop language and just to create the conversation about human value. I'm happy that we've got like a live version that we can share with people that shows you how to use it, and it's got like printouts for workshops and stuff.
Okay, well maybe you can share that with me and we can share it with share a link in the chat.
Yeah,
when
sure.
we finish up.
Do you say we've got 20 minutes to go?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just talk about like 2 other examples, I suppose, really quickly. But like, so that's just like one little feature, like a much bigger, like kind of punt and a project that I led was, a bedding company, like a mattress company came to us. I'm sure they won't mind me saying it. It's mattresses have got to be the most boring possible product that you could work on.
I guess you just don't really think about it once you've got one.
Yeah, well, they're a white foam, or like, I won't go into the detail because I know way too much about beds now, but they're like a white cube, like they hide the magic and, all that kind of stuff. So, they came to us, they're an amazing business, AHB, 110 years old now, family owned. We want to last another 110 years. We want to innovate our product. Nothing's changed in 50 years. What should we do? And we, looked at how can we build like a value proposition for a mattress that helps people to some degree, because it is having this huge effect. You're spending like whatever it is, like
third of your life.
Yeah. I used to know all those stats.
Yeah. I just guessed.
Yeah.
Also not scientific.
Sounds right. So the value proposition that we came up with, they ultimately adopted for their entire business, is improving lives through better sleep. And they're the biggest bed manufacturer in Australia. So just through this product development and user testing, we're able to sort of really drive that change in them. And then the product itself, one of the insights were there was a huge amount of sleep tracking already going on. The things that came up in forums and in user testing all the time was, I can track my sleep, but I can't really do that much about it. So we helped them develop a product that had like has chambers in it that change the firmness of the mattress so that you can track your sleep, understand whether you're doing, kind of well or badly, and how the quality of your sleep, not just the quantity of your sleep, is going, and then adjust the sleep service so you can get better. And then it gives you tips about maybe you should be going to bed a bit earlier, it should be a bit firmer, and it tries to help you engage with that topic.
Right.
And, to the person's question earlier, that was basically a matter of saying, well, if we don't innovate, we're going to die. Like we're just another white cube in the shop.
That's all of us in a way, isn't it? Like always need to be
evolving. Yeah. And why not evolve to human value versus, technology? So saying like it's got titanium springs and all those things that you see on like the ads on TV.
Right.
So that's sort of like at a bigger product level. And then at like a business level, this is actually a service that one of the team members here at Mentally Friendly has founded, and we've like invested in him and we're supporting him on his journey. But it's a complicated thing that I'm not going to go into too much detail. But basically, it's the value proposition is that it helps you get the most out of therapy. It's called Ally Health, and basically, there's this amazing service that the Australian government provides, which is rebated mental health therapy sessions, and it's fantastic, except it doesn't really work at scale that well because it's missing all this human value.
Right.
Like you have to go to a doctor and they'll like refer you somewhere, and it's all a bit like the system design or the service design is really, really great, but the human factors are sort of lacking, I guess. So we really looked at like connection, autonomy, and privacy. How do we connect people with their therapist and that journey? Build autonomy, purpose, and control so they can understand what's going to happen next. They don't feel like a passenger. They don't feel surprised. They don't feel scared by the process. And then privacy, for obvious reasons, no one wants to share their mental health data.
Right.
And most of the available services can't promise you that they're not going to share that data.
Yeah.
And even just putting it on your phone, if you're just like going to a session or writing information onto your notes, like where's that being stored?
Yeah.
So by really focusing on delivering these 3 types of human value, I think there's like a huge, there's a business model, a whole business model just around providing those 3 things.
Oh, fantastic. And so this is like delivered to the audience like through an app?
Yeah. So this this is an app that basically allows you to you will have claimed your sessions, your 6 to 10 sessions. It then helps you understand what's going to happen next, helps you write notes, keep track of the things that your therapist spoke to you about, and those sorts of things. And obviously there's like several kind of paid features and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great. I'll keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
So it gets a bit quicker from here on, I think. So the next one is just setting up the process. And there's just one main kind of like myth, I guess, that I hear, or cliche I hear tons, which is we don't have the time or money for like an amazing human-centered process. And traditional lengthy human-centered design processes don't really guarantee good outcomes. Like,
right.
I think it's actually a bit of a danger. Like, they can. I'm not saying that they're not good, but the thing that guarantees, or is most likely to create really great outcomes, is the mindset of the designer. I'm always really worried when I hear people talking too much about their process, particularly in heaps of detail around like the different steps and that sort of waterfall kind of mindset of like it's like ethnographic study, and then there's this.
Oh, right. Like this is step 1, step 2, step 3, something in the middle, profit, like kind of thing.
Or even that. Like just that we're going to build empathy by spending tons of time with people, then we're going to start designing things. Whereas the only real way to deliver or build empathy is to be the team that's making the product with the customer, to break down that kind of that like research building kind of barrier, so that you have to look people in the eye that are using this product or service or have used it, talk to them, not just asking people kind of what they're interested in. And I think while that doesn't mean I'm not saying that the traditional processes aren't good. I just mean it's an opportunity for people who are in organizations and businesses that don't have access to that type of process. And if you're a designer, you can ideate, you can build, and you can test. There's like versions of all those things that you can do. And if you're just going through that iterative process and putting yourself in front of those people and with those people, you're gonna inherently you're gonna start building better products and services, and you're gonna start seeing and also obviously having a really clear view of like what that value you're trying to create is.
Right.
So yeah, I just think it's a important one. If you're to set up the process means setting up your mindset and your goals, not so much just having this really beautiful classical double diamond necessarily.
Right.
Yeah. And then setting up yourself, the designers. So like when we look to hire, when we look to improve ourselves as designers, we're just trying to be the dot in the middle between empathy and entrepreneurialism. Like I think there's a bit of a myth there, I suppose, or it's easy to get into this, like I'm empathetic, I'm really understand people, and I'm not that entrepreneurial, and also the other way around. And I think oftentimes people who have like a lot of empathy see people with, or people who have a lot of one think the other one's a bit icky.
Right, you think it's almost like they're two separate, like us and them.
Yeah, it does sort of feel that way sometimes, right? But I think like the real talk here is that you cannot succeed as a designer without both those things. And you're not going to make progress without understanding humans and really mastering like co-design, human-centered design, well-being outcomes, focus, all that kind of stuff, as well as finding ways for those ideas to succeed. So like market fit, financial sustainability, and sort of an action bias. Like without both those things, you're going to create problems. Empathy without entrepreneurialism is like launch parties and Facebook likes and no change. And entrepreneurialism without empathy is role commissions and, like stuff that no one needs but has bought because the Facebook told them to.
Right.
So I think it's really important as an individual that you sort of recognize whether your strengths and weaknesses are. You don't have to be 100% of both, but try and, lean and build up that other muscle. And then also surround yourself with people that balance you out really well. Obviously, design is a team sport these days. So, looking to that team balance as well. And
so you can kind of achieve this by like having like a really diverse team.
Yeah.
And then interacting and then finding, how you work together.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. How much time do we have?
We've got about 10 minutes.
So do we want to do questions or should I?
Yeah, if there are any questions, now's a great time to ask if there's any more questions, because we do only have 10 minutes left. So you just keep going.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, as a team, it's like reasonably self-explanatory, but I've got a diagram, so I'll talk to the diagram.
Right.
But, like that empathetic side of you or the team sort of comes up and defines that sort of human goal. This is obviously alongside the business goals as well, or the organizational goals. And then you sort of pass it off to the entrepreneurial side of yourself that says, I wonder if this thing has market fit, if it can scale. Like, is it worth doing if it's not going to be able to help lots of people or help people completely? So then you switch into this entrepreneurial, like, value proposition, market fit, test, can it scale? If you find that it can scale, it allows you to invest more time, make the argument to your business or organization that you should put more of your resources towards that thing. Hopefully it's also generating, as I am hinting at, sort of like revenue for that company as well as a human outcome.
And I think a lot of designers out there like always need that, you know, but how when I'm in that team by myself, like the question that we had before, like how can I continue to hold these values when I feel like this cog in this machine, and sometimes the only designer, even in a small business, and trying to champion this.
Well, yeah, I think it's just having like those two measures, you know, it's just keeping in mind, like you make what you measure. So if you don't even have it in mind that there is a piece of human value that you would like to create, there is zero chance that you're going to make
like
it.
Stumble across it.
Yeah.
You have to plan for it.
Yeah, and the process, and this is where I think the point I was trying to make before, the process of designing something that you're only measuring. So if you're only measuring financial gain and you go through the like a beautiful human-centered process, you're not going to get human-centered or like good human outcomes.
Right.
You know, the perfect example of that is, well, probably Facebook, I guess, right? Or you know, like the buy now, pay later products. I'm sure there is a way to do that in a like really, because you know, debt is important to people. You know, it's an important facility to have available to you. But you know, that was they've got amazing design teams. The products are beautiful. They're definite needs, like, oh, I need access to money because I'm, you know, it's the day before my pay and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But, and they went through, I'm sure they user tested, I'm sure they did ethnographic testing, I'm sure they heard and I believe that those are real pain points. But the result is like an epidemic of addiction to debt.
Right.
You know? So that's, you know, unless you have, this is the human value we're trying to create, there's zero chance you're going to create it. And then just like to build out this example, like we got the opportunity to work with Relationships Australia, who are, you know, if you're going to stereotype the organization, you'd say that they're an empathetic organization more so than like an entrepreneurial organization. It's their job to deliver sort of, relationship counseling to people. And they, you know, they're sort of pretty beholden to government funding and things like that. So they had this like ambition to develop some type of model where they could make money but also do good, which is something that they'd not had an opportunity to do before.
Because everything has always been through funding.
Yeah.
So they haven't had this kind of, well, how do we make money as well?
They never had to build that muscle, right?
Yeah.
But because they get the money, which is difficult, and they do an amazing job of getting the money.
Oh, I like that. Build that muscle.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But it's these two muscles, right? So they're really empathetic, but they just don't have the kind of like mindset and culture, or they didn't at the beginning anyway, to develop and deliver like a paid service.
Right.
And it's like it felt icky, I'm sure, to most of them at the beginning, right? But 100% of the profits from this business just go to funding more counseling sessions for people.
Right.
So, I mean, again, it's reasonably self-explanatory when you say it out loud, but, you know, we just went through that empathetic process of understanding what people needed, and we're able to identify that there was this huge gap in human value. There was really lacking connection when you're trying to buy a counselor, for want of a better term, or a therapist. We've said we want to create connection. We want to create connection and purpose and autonomy. We want people to understand what they're getting themselves in for and connect to the right person. We then took that into testing. We were able to test it really rapidly. We went through a couple of different iterations and different ideas and different angles that they could choose. We were able to find one that could scale for them, and then flip that back into empathy, went back into testing, went round and round and round, and they've launched this business. And you can imagine if we weren't really pushing that like human value lens as well, we would have just said, okay, you do good over there and do the counseling, and we'll do like business over here.
Totally.
And then we'll build something which isn't necessarily delivering quality outcomes, but it's building,
driving profit.
But it's driving profit.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good example of, you know, being able to stay within your morals as like a empathy driven business.
That's a great example.
And still make money, because it'd be easier to be like pumping through, because they're obviously very well connected into the industry. So you'd be pumping through recommendations and just clipping the ticket along the way and not caring what happens after that. But that's not great for them because they're not going to get repeat visitors, because we know if you're not connected with the right therapist, which is essentially the problem out in the market,
right,
then you don't go back to them, you don't complete your like course of training.
So there are like people that might go to a therapist, they didn't really click or it didn't really work for them. It might be their first time they've ever done it. And they're like, yeah, this isn't for me.
That's
and
exactly
so,
right.
And it could just be because they were unlucky and
they didn't make the connection.
That's
exactly right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's, I mean, we could talk about that for a while, but that's pretty much, I think, a good example of just trying to marry these two things.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go the other way and show an example where like an empathetic company became entrepreneurial, which is like something you don't like sort of think about that often, I guess.
Well, we've got 5 minutes. If you can do a quick version, I'll just shout out. So someone asked about the replay. Yes, all these will be available for replay. So if you do miss anything, if you have to go to work for some reason, anything like that's totally fine. Yeah. Cool.
All
Final
right.
thoughts.
So final thoughts, I guess, is just on the other half of that, which is the trust. And this is where I think this really healthy kind of tension exists between, just getting through my notes here, this really healthy tension between those two words, trust and responsibility, exist exist in our day-to-day kind of work. Like if we see it as our responsibility to intervene in people's lives, or that's just the reality of what we're doing, then the question needs to be asked, like, can we be trusted with people's well-being?
As designers,
yeah. Can designers be trusted with the decisions that we're making? And that's where the controversy around nudging comes in.
Right.
In particular, like nudging is this behavioral economics term that describes like just giving someone the right input at the right moment, really cleverly thought through to help them or to encourage them to make one choice over the other. You know, you hope that you're using that for good, but it's still quite paternalistic, right? It's deciding whether you think people should turn left or right. It's deciding whether you think people should spend their money on eating. Like, well, the perfect example is with banking apps. You know, there's this, eating out every night, like the avocado generation sort of thing, is like sort of seen as a negative thing. But is it our job to tell people how to spend their money?
Right.
And where is that line? Because like just spending all your money on gambling count, or spending all your money on credit cards, like should we be helping people not to do that?
Right.
So I think there's like a really interesting and healthy kind of conversation that needs to take place around not can we be trusted, because there is no other option, but how do we best manage that responsibility and that trust that's been put in us? And I know a lot of designers talk about, you know, removing themselves from the process, like traceability through testing, removing bias and all those sorts of things. And I just don't buy it. The word design means to decide. That is your job. If you're not deciding, if you're not adding value to the process, then you're not a designer, you're a researcher. So if you identify as a designer, then you are making decisions which are changing people's lives.
As one of those designers, I'm gonna have to make a decision that we're gonna have to say our goodbyes. So we are out of time. Goes quick.
Yeah, it's very quick.
Super, super quick. That was amazing. Thank you for walking us through that.
No worries.
I'm excited that we can continue this conversation in several hours later on with our roundtable, which you're going to join.
Yeah, I'll come back, Savo.
Which will be awesome. So we'll unpack that a little bit more, along with a lot of the other things that we're talking about today. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes with our next guest, so please stick around.